All right, listen. So I wanted to take a minute to welcome you to I guess this is episode 1.
Episode 1
of the Boss Juice podcast. We're pretty excited about this. We've got a guest here who is actually a client and also, I think, a younger business owner with a great story. I think there's a lot to be learned from the experiences that these people face within their different businesses. It's just I'm real anxious to have you get to know Matt Aiken from Aiken Refuse. The other piece of this important puzzle is Antonino Fabraro, part of the Boss Juice podcast, co-creator. So with that being said, I think that we'd like to get into this, but I think one of the first things we want to do too is we have a sponsor for this particular episode that we're excited about. It's called Elder Genius. It's a craft brewery in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. We'll get more into that later, but I think this is a nice way to open this up. So, Matt, we wanted to welcome you, and I've got, a really important first question. I know nothing here is rehearsed. We've not really talked about anything, but I do know that you have some tattoos. What was your first tattoo, and what is the significance behind it?
My first tattoo was actually I was 16 years old, and the funny thing is I didn't really know what I wanted. I just wanted a tattoo.
Sure.
So I got a deer skull, and it was pretty terrible. So it's been redone since then, and but yeah, that was my first one.
Hey, that's good. You got to start somewhere, right? Yeah. And then once you start, the saying is you never really slow down after that. So
yep.
And this particular podcast is not really about tattoos. It's more about learning some of the ins and outs, the struggles, the real important pieces I think that you'd like to share about the refuse industry in general. And really, I think what's important to know is, man, behind every small business, small to medium-sized business, there's a family behind that. There are people behind it. And a lot of other people who don't get that little peek behind the curtain, they never see that. And I think that's one of the things that Antonino and I want to really start to expose is all these little things that people don't normally get to see. So with this business, Aiken Refuse has been around since 1955, correct?
It started out as actually Bartolomeo Refuse, and I don't really even know how legitimate of a business, if it was an actual corporation then. But it was my dad's uncles. There was 3 different uncles that started it, and they each had their own route. A lot of them worked in the mills and stuff, so they, had a couple hundred customers on a Saturday, local to Elwood City. And slowly but surely, they all kind of wanted to get out and retire, and my dad acquired all 3 of their routes. And that was in the late 70s and early 80s. In 81, he officially started Aiken Refuse.
That's crazy. So help me with the math here. So like 40 plus years now, you guys. So then, all right, so your dad is involved with this thing, and he's probably has some employees, some people he works with. And that was back in the day, your traditional picking, collecting, transporting waste materials, correct? Residential.
Yeah, that was the good old days whenever they went in your garage and got your can and took it out to the truck or on your back porch. Or I'm sure we had a lot of old ladies. We went right into their kitchen and got it right out of the, it was a different time whenever you could do that.
Right. So So we fast forward till from the early 80s now, and then Matt is born, right? And how early on were you involved with the business? Because I know you've had to have learned so many different pieces of things, mistakes. I think you've seen successes and built from that. But tell me about, tell us about when you got started and some of the things that that really stick out in your mind about the business.
I mean, it started as early as when in the early 90s when I was only 4 or 5 years old. I was washing trucks and sweeping floors and all through school it was rare that I went straight home, to do homework or play. I usually went down to work and hung out there because both of my parents were there, so there was nobody to watch me at home, me or my sister. It wasn't until I was about 20, 21 whenever I started taking a management role, and I had some things that I kind of managed on my own, and shortly after that my dad sold out to Waste Management because I was in college and there was some health issues. He was going on his third stint, and heart casts and the stress of just being in business that long and kind of having the responsibility that all fell on him. By his early 50s, it got to him. And so he offloaded, a lot of the residential routes and the commercial routes, and just kept the roll-offs. And I was kind of finishing up college, and that's kind of where it took off. We kind of went a different direction for a little bit. The oil field was huge around here at that point, and we bought some roll-off trucks, and we were hauling for oil companies, drill cuttings and stuff, and kind of kept our foot in the door with the landfills and all your truck licensing, and kept the business name more or less going. In 2015, my non-compete was up to where I could get back into the garbage a little bit. And but it was about the right time there because the oil field kind of died off around here, and we had all these trucks and needed to do something with them. So I started trading them in. Got myself a commercial front loader, and that was a struggle for a while. I always thought that it would early on it would have been easier to just kind of reintroduce that name back into the business, and it took a little bit. By 2020, it really took off and kind of reestablished Aiken Refuse as one of the biggest haulers here around our hometown, Elwood and Newcastle, and had Stephen stretching down into Beaver County.
I think one of the things is important for our listeners to understand too, just because we're familiar with the business, but the residential garbage collection is one piece. Then there's commercial dumpsters for a whole host of different types of local businesses. And then the third piece is the roll-off boxes. And those are residential private customers, clear up the big commercial contractors who need to discard different materials and things like that from projects. So
right.
The Aiken business is like a big three-headed beast. And one piece, the residential garbage collection piece, went away for a few years. And you've worked hard over the past, 7 years, something like that, to get it restructured and get it back in the direction where you'd like it to be. So let me inject a piece that will involve Antonino as well. So you came to me one day and said, I've been looking at all these off-the-shelf softwares for in the truck to in our fleet vehicles to manage the routes and kind of connect with the billing. And you run into issues where the commercial dumpsters have maybe a car in front of them in the middle of the night when you're trying to pick up. And, by the time you get back out, the owner's there and says, hey, you missed our pickup. And you said, no, there was a car there, but you had nothing not that you're trying to create any friction or anything like that. You had nothing to validate what you were claiming. So you said, I'm looking at these off-the-shelf softwares and I'm just not finding exactly what I want. And I said, hey, I know this guy, Antonino, that has a business called AtsApp. And they develop custom software, mobile apps, things like that. I said, I think that he can help, but let me just make that introduction and let you two kind of go from there. Antonino, when we made that introduction, talk a little bit about how Matt helped you understand what kind of a product was going to help his business efforts. And then Matt, you can talk a little bit after about how this is helping to enhance your business and your services even more so.
Yeah. So when I first met Matt, it was a really weird time because I actually had a startup company called Pima. It was a mobile application that basically aggregated events in people's local areas. So like if you were interested in happy hours, networking events, fireworks shows, you name it, I was aggregating this data based on your interests, suggesting it to you to go see. Now this was around 2017, I believe, when Matt and I were introduced, maybe 2018. Mm-hmm. And this company had just failed because of, long story short, for the listeners who don't know about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook basically got in trouble with the FBI during the 2016 election for using their Graph API, which basically gathers data from Facebook users in a way that isn't so much protective or user-friendly of their data. Mm-hmm. So I woke up one morning, they had shut that off for like valid reasons, and there was no data in the application. Our investors kind of panicked, and they were like, what do we do? How do we go forward? And I was like, well, how about we start posting instead of aggregating data? And that was not something that the investors were interested in, mm-hmm. because we were then competing with things like Yelp or Eventbrite, and they weren't trying to have this uphill battle against the larger fish. So with his business being a failure, I decided to kind of pivot into software consulting. So we had started working with very early stage startup companies and very either early stage businesses or small to medium sized businesses. And I think Matt was the third client that we had at that time. There was the two other startups that we were working with, and then you introduced me to Matt. And from my perspective, Matt's a really good use case or like case study, because he actually went from, as he had mentioned, kind of you're almost like a one-man show when we kind of met. Maybe had like two other people working for
right. Yeah, I was the only guy. I mean, we had some guys running in roll-off trucks, but yeah, I was managing, the commercial dumpsters, and I was running that truck. We only had one going, and the need for a software, as our customer base grew, arose, right whenever we kind of got hooked up, and at that time I was getting ready to hire somebody to take the position that I was filling, because I had to do other things. Mm-hmm. It was getting very difficult to run the truck and do everything else as well. On top of that, I started a family right at that time. Yeah. And, I had a young son at home. So, like I said, we got hooked up, and I needed the route more or less on an electronic format that, another driver could follow through, and there would be checks and balances and kind of a report back to me So whenever customers did call, if there was a disruption in service, we already, the office already had a story for them, and you could resolve the problem, a lot quicker. And that's kind of how we ended up.
Yeah. It's I think I will say, not to sound biased, but Matt is one of my favorite clients because he is sociable, easy to get along with, and he has, this is a compliment, a very good plan of where he is and where he wants to go. And believe me, we work with a lot of businesses and startup companies and smaller businesses who don't kind of have that vision. It's one thing to have a vision, but to be able to have a plan to execute is completely different. And so I think that's like why you're so successful, is that you're very matter of fact. You know what you want, you know what you need, and it's like let's just do it.
Super cliche to say, but Matt has like this uncanny experience beyond his years. He knows what he wants, and he can really explain really well to a person like Antonino something that's an abstract concept of building a custom software package. You knew what components you wanted, what components you needed. I know through working with Matt, I handle Matt's marketing and branding for the business. And when he was driving the trucks, when he was in the fleet vehicles, I hated to even bother you late morning, early afternoon with questions and things like that. I know this guy has already been in the truck since like 3:00 in the morning. He's been out, he's been hustling. And again, with a family, a baby, all these other things, it's just a lot I think that gets taken for granted by other people who don't understand what you're going through. With that being said, maybe this is a good segue into some of the really challenging things about your career, your business, and maybe some of the, some of the payoffs too. And I don't even mean financially. I mean some of the things that you're able to do because you are a business owner. Talk about some of the challenges, some of the things that most people wouldn't expect that are part of this industry that you face.
Well, there are some advantages of owning your own business. Your schedule, I guess, can be flexible, but there's still a huge workload that needs to get done. Mm-hmm. So, if that's been probably the most difficult is making sure that I make time for my kids. And I love what I do. And once I kind of get into a project, I want to get it done. Right. And that's a challenge for me to just shut it off and go home. I've grown a lot in the last couple of years to do that. It helps whenever you get some quality people in place to take some of those responsibilities that you can delegate them to. And I'm getting to that point. But yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge is, making yourself go home.
Absolutely. I think that's like one of the things I kind of learned early on too is like, I remember last year, there's a couple of times where I would text some of the people on my team, and they'd be like, "Hey, it's like nicely would say like it's 10:00 at night." I'm like, "Oh crap!" Like I felt bad, but it's like from my standpoint, this is my livelihood. This is how I make a living. Like the way I view it is I put a lot of trust in people to help me do what I need to do, and I think society doesn't outline it that well. Like when I worked a 9-to-5 job at a large corporation, and it was great. You went to work at 9:00, went home, clocked out at 5:00, went home. But to be honest, like I cared about my work because I wanted to get my work done and I wanted to, get paid. But I didn't truly care if the company, was successful or not. I just wanted to get paid and I wanted to go home. And I think as a business owner, that mentality is completely different. because for me, it is literally my life. Like, it's my livelihood. Like, you know, if we get a bad review or someone calls in and has a complaint, I take that to heart very seriously. Like, you know, if a client calls and says like, hey, you know, there's this issue, blah, 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 you know, or this didn't work out as planned. Like, I take that to heart because it's my name at the end of the day.
It's so true.
It's a different experience, I think, than, you know, people who don't have a business won't kind of see that side.
Yeah, kind of to add to that, I mean, it's just, it more or less, especially whenever you're starting up, the work won't get done unless you do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it was difficult to explain to my wife. You know, we had our son at 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. And at 3 a.m. Monday morning, I'm leaving her and him in the hospital because there was nobody else to go do the route.
Right.
You know, that was difficult. Like, it was difficult for me and her because I was like, I gotta go. I mean, you know, if you want to afford to buy stuff, I got to take care of these customers or I'm going to lose them.
It's so funny because I remember that day. You were at the hospital that night and you were in a truck 3:30, whatever it was the next morning. Not even about a 6-hour window, something like that, if that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So Alder Genius is the sponsor for this particular episode, and we're pretty thrilled about that. I know a little bit about their business because I've been there a few times for business meetings and then just some fun. And they've got great food, great sandwiches. One of my favorites there is something called the Mushroom Monster. If you're there, you got to check it out. It's a great sandwich. And a few of these samples that they provided, the Hoptavarian IPA is one of my favorites. So I'm going to crack that open and pour a little bit. But in the meantime, this is probably a good time, Matt, to talk about some of those struggles. You've made personal sacrifices. You left your wife and brand new baby to get back out there in the truck to keep this business moving. There's no time off when you're reestablishing things and getting it going. I'm going to crack this open. Can you talk a minute about some of the other things that you kind of experience as part of this business and being an owner at this point?
Yeah. Another big one that comes to mind, and Antonino was very involved in this one. When we got back into the residential service, it wasn't until 2020. And at that point I had 0 residential customers. I was more or less focusing on building a commercial customer base and continuing to build the roll-offs. And an opportunity came up to bid a municipality of 8,000 homes. Wasn't really the ideal first account, just for the sheer size of it. And this is where Antonino kind of really, helped with managing that customer base and being able to bill out and collect payments from 8,000 people. When we started, we were very understaffed. Mm-hmm. It was in April of 2020, and everybody knows that as, the very start of the COVID shutdowns and trying to get people to come, to come work for you. It was very bad timing for all that. And, we had all these payments coming in, and with this particular system, we had to mail out stickers to those people after they paid, and they were, it was just very, very difficult to manage that that large customer base. And that's whenever I reached out to Antonino, and was like, we got to make a change here. We got to automate some of this stuff. Like, I've been up for 3 or 4 days. I've been entering payments. This isn't what I want to do. I want to be a garbage man. Like, I'd catch an hour or two of sleep in my truck in the parking lot and to go back in and just keep entering payments. And like I said, we got it modified very quickly, actually. I mean, it was, within a few weeks we kind of got a handle on it, and to where, it was, most of it was computerized. But yeah, the first few weeks and kind of heading up to the start of that contract was another rough patch there.
I can remember because everything needed to work in tandem. The communication with this new municipal client and all the people that would fall under this specialized program that you did not create.
Right.
You were following guidelines, right? But it was a cumbersome process with collecting payment and then mailing out tags and all these other things, and then working with the post office to make sure that everything got delivered. There were a lot of struggles. And I can remember when we were working with Antonino and the crew at ATSAP, when the customer portal was built and we were plugging that into your website just to make it easy and convenient and accessible for all these new customers. And it wasn't a couple hundred, it was 8,000 people, which, when you're manually processing things versus having them go in with their account set up and then making sure that everything's reconciled payment-wise, it's a big, huge deal. So that was another important technology phase that you kind of spearheaded, explained to Antonino and company exactly what you needed, and they came through once again. They built this portal that we plugged into the website.
Right. Yeah, I was very unfamiliar with. I was familiar with servicing. Picking up trash for 8,000. I mean, we had probably 30,000 customers. And I oversaw that. As my dad, managed all that. But that wasn't the hard part. I never, times had changed from, like the early 2000s, whenever you build out people, a lot of it wasn't credit cards, and what I mean, that stuff wasn't huge back then. A lot of it was, people would send you a check and it would pay for the entire year, because back then you could pay for an entire year of garbage for like $40. You know what I mean? Or it's something but with the price of everything going up and then the different ways to pay, with credit cards, I was unfamiliar with all that. Mm-hmm. So that was a challenge of learning how to the office side of taking care of 8,000 people. The trash part was easy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that's not just 8,000. That's one client. That's one project. You're also servicing a host of other people with the roll-off boxes with commercial accounts. So this is just one other piece that's plugged in. So technology once again has kind of moved you and your business forward. And because we talk and we strategize, I know where some things are going, but talk for a minute about where you see the industry heading and some of the other advancements that you guys are introducing to build this business even further, the Aiken Refuse business.
Well, I think the future of this industry is try and do it with and I hate to say it, but with the least amount of employees as possible, because it is very difficult. Mm-hmm. With the, especially in this industry, getting people to come to work. So, you try and automate everything as possible. We, We just got an automated truck with a grabber arm on the side that reaches out and grabs the can and dumps it. And that's eliminating a labor that we can't find anyway, on the back of the truck. So that's kind of the direction that I believe a lot of people in this industry are heading. It's not just me. I mean, it's a necessity. The next, on top of that, you're going to try and automate as much as you can, even more so than you have now in the office. We never had a need for a machine that folded and stuffed, invoices into envelopes. But I just bought one, right. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to find people.
Well, here's the funny thing, too, about employing people, right? It's been a struggle for every client that I serve. I don't care if you're a law office, a restaurant, whatever, a real estate industry. Finding and retaining people right now is a big, huge challenge. But the other piece of it is, I think it's important to point out, when you say about employing people, just because you may be shifting the way your business functions and operates because of the introduction of pieces of technology, you also need people to build the technology. You need people to build equipment, things like that. So there are other industries that are hiring to bring people into the fold, whereas maybe through your automation process, you're right-sizing, the amount of people that you have versus not hiring people. The funding that you had on that end is now going into other resources, which therefore is building other people's businesses too. So it's just a funny cycle. And I don't want people to jump on, they're not hiring anymore. No, that's absolutely not it. The thing is, you're creating other opportunities. And I know, for one thing, you're always looking for drivers, good qualified people. So, in the vision you have for this business too, where do you see this going in the next few years? You've done so much in this short segment of where the transition of the business from your parents' hands into your hands, and they're not completely out of it. They're actively involved with this thing every single day, as well as your sister. I mean, you pulled your sister from a completely different occupation and industry, and you knew that she was going to be a really good fit. She's working out really well. I know you're pretty happy to have her involved, but this is still a family-owned, operated, managed business. Where do you see this going for Matt Aiken and Company in the next few years?
I mean, it more or less is, I'll build it as big as it can get, as long as I can get quality people. Mm-hmm. So to kind of take a step back, on when you're introducing automated trucks and you are essentially eliminating a salary of one guy or girl, you essentially you have the opportunity to pay the driver who is doing it all by himself. He can make a pretty decent living, really good living, mm-hmm. As a garbage man. So you're creating more, I guess, better positions, higher paying positions, which gives you more quality people. You're not, we don't pay anybody minimum wage, but mm-hmm. you're not going to get minimum effort from somebody that's going to be making, a really quality salary.
Yeah.
So that's kind of as long as I can keep getting quality people, I'll keep stretching out and branching into new areas and building it as far as it'll go.
Yeah, it's fun watching your business creep into, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, in other communities, other townships, other municipalities. And the cool thing is, we get a lot of really good feedback from people who are really satisfied with the service. I know even on the operations side of it, you're doing things to improve on the from an office staffing side. I know that you want that to be tip-top shape all the time as well. Antonino, while we've got Matt here, kind of undivided attention, is there anything, in your opinion, that we've missed or that you'd like to hear from Matt while we got him, giving us this precious time?
Yeah. So, the one thing that I've seen with working with Matt is that, I didn't know much about the garbage industry at all. I didn't realize that it was so involved. It's a lot more complex than just what people think. Like growing up, I'd like to see the garbage man come by. I thought the trucks were cool, as a little kid. But it's like it's a lot more involved than just like a truck come up and throwing garbage into the back of a truck. There's a lot more involved. One of the things I think Matt has done really well is the innovation around his business. So, like for example, I picture his father having this business in the 70s, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. He was working for his uncles all through the 70s and then took over in the 80s, yeah.
And just picture that, Shawn, like all being on paper. Mm-hmm. Like he had no computer system, to my knowledge, that was automating any of that. Like, can you imagine if you had the scale that Matt has right now and he was doing this all by paper? The importance to innovate, I think is Matt's strong suit, where he kind of innovates his business and he's willing to adapt and change. Me as a tech guy, my biggest question, or maybe not question, but my biggest interest is, you're talking about automating some of the hands to pick up the garbage to kind of the way you put it, not eliminate a job, but give a better, higher paying job to a driver. We see a lot of talk about these self-driving cars. So I have to ask this kind of off the wall question here. Do you ever see a time where we have automated garbage trucks that are driving themselves and just picking up garbage and do you see, is that something, if money, research, and time was not an issue, would you invest in something like that? Do you see an ROI on that? Or do you still think that there's a lot of benefit to that kind of the individual playing an important part in garbage collection?
I think in certain areas, it could be done. I do think at some time it could be. Part of me says yes, sign me up. And I can literally run it by myself again, from a computer, just set it up and push start and everything just goes. But there's, you'll lose that, that personal touch that, the drivers do have with their customers,
Right.
The guys that work for me, they get Christmas tips every year, from people, and they give them a good quality service. What happens if a raccoon knocks your can over? Right. You know what I mean, and spills stuff. Are they going to be able to build something? A robot smart enough to identify that and clean it up for the customer? Our guys all do. If the neighbor's cat gets into it. Right. That's just the company standard that we have. That, a lot of guys, they complain. Well, it's not my fault that the cat gets into it. I said, well, it's not their fault either. You know what I mean? So that's just something that we do. But yeah, do I think it could be done? Yeah, I do think it could be. I'd be real. I hope it happens in my lifetime so I can watch it, because I think it would be something really cool to see. Yeah.
That was a really great question. Leave it to the Antonino to come up with this, kind of projecting into the future kind of deal. But it's so funny because you could actually almost see this in certain communities. Now, we live in Western Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of different types of geography here. But in certain plans and things like that, with specialized codes and readers and things like that, I think it's definitely possible at some point.
It's 100% possible. But I think there's a lot of variables, and not to cut you off there, but
No,
he
no,
brought up
no.
a really interesting point about like the cat getting into like the garbage can.
Yeah.
So, if you take Uber, Tesla, and all those different companies that are doing these self-driving cars, a lot of the research shows that these cars are very good at identifying that something is there. So, they can identify, hey, there is something in front of me, there's something to the right of me, something to the left of me. What they have a very hard time at identifying, and this is not to get off on like a whole like technology rant here, but what they're very bad at identifying is that thing in front of me a puddle, a pothole, or a person, So, and those are three different things, because if it's a person, you want to stop. If it's a pothole, you might not want to stop. You might want to veer a little bit to the left so you don't bust open your tire. But if it's a puddle, you don't want to stop, or maybe you want to slow down because you don't want to hydroplane, and there's so many unknown variables. And so it's like, I think there's always that human touch. Yeah. And to Matt's point about innovation and jobs changing, I think like in my head, this futuristic view of, an automated garbage collection system, there's either someone or multiple people sitting at a home base monitoring all these trucks and saying like, oh, like truck floor is out on like, Route 7 and there's a cat in the garbage can. Like, what do we do? Send someone out there.
Yeah, that's just one example of all the variables that you're going to hit. There's a lot of variables, and most of our customers, they all have a unique, almost like a unique setting, I guess, where I don't know if you could teach a truck to fit in places that we have guys getting trucks into, and bad weather situations. And I don't really, the thing I would like to see if it ever is honestly affordable, you know what I mean? Is, okay, if you automate it and you do eliminate some salaries, but, is garbage service going to cost $200 a month per house, or $500, or what would that cost for that technology to,
because
to actually work and do it well?
Because like right now, like I'm just, and you'd obviously know a lot more than I do, but like I think of every truck, okay, you pay like maintenance for, gas, fixes, something breaks down, fix it, this and that. But now you're worrying about that. And then this whole automated system that like, from my standpoint, if your self-driving garbage truck system doesn't work one morning, like that's not like, let's, quickly fix a tire. Like, it's like something's wrong,
Right.
So it's like, how do you get that up and running quickly, because you got a lot of people to service that day?
Well, I think here's the beauty, because this is what Boss Juice is kind of extracting from these conversations. When Antonino threw this idea past you, you didn't say, hell no. You said, I'd be interested. So that's that entrepreneurial wiring that you have that not everybody has. You're willing to roll the dice, take calculated risks here and there, but you're always willing to consider new ways of doing things, which is that's part of this entrepreneurial spirit. These are the kind of things that we want to capture too with Boss Juice. So as we kind of wrap this up, I know you've got a busy day, probably clear into early evening at this point now. And your coach, is tonight hockey night or not?
It's not. That was last night.
Matt's also a hockey coach. He played at a pretty high level for most of his life, and now he's got a little guy, five, six, somewhere.
He's
5 years old, and Matt's a hockey coach too, in addition to putting in all these other hours. So
that's awesome.
Kind of in wrapping this up, is there one last thing that you'd like to share with our listeners about the business, about your family, anything that you want to share before we wrap this up?
Sorry, one more thing to kind of go off of that. If you can answer that question, but also kind of if you could give one word of advice to an entrepreneur or a new business owner that might be listening and want to like kind of learn from your experience, what might you tell them?
I guess prepare yourself for the days that you're going to come to work and you're going to work really hard and it's going to cost you money to do it. If you have a truck go down and it's, $15,000-$20,000 repair, you just got to get past the fact that, you just worked for like 2 weeks just to pay for that repair.
Right.
But if you just keep going and just don't quit, and you'll get to a point where that won't bother you anymore. It's just more part of daily operations. So I guess that's my biggest advice is you're gonna have ups and downs. Don't get too high with the ups and don't get too low with the downs.
I like that.
I think it's great. One thing I want to do. So, in this inaugural little episode 1, official episode 1, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a busy day. It's going to continue to be a busy day for you. Antonino and I, we've got a lot of things happening as well, but it was really nice that you guys were able to get together. And one thing we want to do too is, again, thank Auto Genius and kind of take it from there. This episode will be out soon, and we've got some really neat things lined up. Anything else you want to share, Antonino?
No, Matt, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, and good luck with all your future business endeavors.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
It was good.